India just did what no other country dared. Even America is shocked. And to truly understand the magnitude of that moment, you have to step back and ask, why is it that in every generation there are moments when a single act, a single decision, a single choice made by a nation changes not just the way it is perceived, but the very balance of the global order? This is not about arrogance. It is not about one country seeking to dominate another. It is about courage. It is about refusing to be boxed into the roles that history or stronger powers have written for you. It is about saying to the world, we will not be spoken for. We will speak for ourselves. We will not be confined by the expectations of others. We will chart our own path. India's decision, whatever policy, whatever bold act lies behind this shock, was not simply about strategy or politics. It was about dignity. It was about sovereignty. It was about the undeniable truth that in the 21st century, no nation, however powerful, can dictate the terms of another's future. And that, my friends, is what left America and much of the West speechless. Because let's be honest, for decades, the global order was structured on a kind of hierarchy. A small group of nations set the rules. They spoke the loudest, and others were expected to listen. They defined what security meant, what development looked like, what partnership should be. And many nations, whether by weakness or necessity, fell in line. But India, with its billion voices, its centuries of history, its resilience forged in the fires of colonial rule and struggle, has never been comfortable being anyone's subordinate. India has always had its own way of seeing the world, its own way of defining power, not through control, but through balance, not through intimidation, but through endurance. And when India moves, it does not move timidly. It moves with the weight of its civilization, with the weight of its people, with the weight of a vision that says, we are not simply inheriting the future, we are shaping it. So when India took this daring step, it did something that most nations hesitate to do. It defied not just a single policy or a single demand, but the very assumption that the old order is unshakable. It showed that courage is more powerful than caution, and that principle is more enduring than pressure. America is shocked because it is not used to hearing no from countries it once assumed would comply. It is not used to being challenged openly, decisively, and unapologetically. But the shock is not anger alone. There is also a quiet recognition, even respect, because deep down, even those who lead the most powerful nations know that history belongs not to those who cling to dominance, but to those who dare to claim equality. Think about it. The world has long said that power belongs to those with the biggest militaries, the largest economies, the strongest alliances. And yes, those things matter, but power also belongs to those who have the courage to say, we will not compromise on our dignity. We will not surrender our choices. We will not be intimidated into silence. That is a different kind of strength. That is the kind of strength that India just displayed. And this is why people across continents are paying attention. Because what India did was not just about India. It was about possibility. It was about demonstrating that smaller nations, rising powers, those who have long been told to wait their turn, can in fact stand tall today. It was about rewriting the script that says the powerful decide and the rest obey. Now, some will ask, was it worth the risk? Was it worth the tension, the backlash, the possibility of sanctions, the uncertainty of markets, the pressure from allies? And the answer depends on what you believe matters most. If you believe the goal of nations is merely to avoid conflict, to stay safe, to never ruffle feathers, then perhaps caution seems wiser. But if you believe the goal of nations is to protect their sovereignty, to lead with dignity, to inspire generations, then courage is the only option. And courage always carries risk. History proves this again and again. Nations that dared to break free from empire risked destruction. But they won freedom. Leaders who dared to demand justice risked prison, but they awakened entire movements. Societies that dared to defy inequality risked chaos, but they birthed revolutions that made the world more just. The question is never whether courage is safe. The question is whether it is necessary, and more often than not, it is the only path to real change. India's daring move sends a signal far beyond its borders. It tells Africa, long sidelined in global trade, that their voices cannot be ignored. It tells Southeast Asia, caught between superpowers, that balance is possible. It tells Latin America, often treated as an afterthought, that independence is not negotiable. It tells Europe, struggling with its own divisions, that partnership must be rooted in respect, not in nostalgia for old empires. And it tells America something too. It tells America that leadership in this new century cannot be based on dominance. It cannot be sustained by pressure or threats. True leadership must be based on partnership, on listening as much as speaking, on respecting sovereignty as much as asserting influence. That is a hard lesson for a superpower that has grown accustomed to setting the rules. But it is a necessary lesson because the alternative is a world in which trust collapses, alliances fracture, and progress stalls. Now let us be clear. India is not seeking conflict. It is not looking to replace one empire with another. What India wants is balance. What India insists on is respect. And by taking this bold step, it has reminded the world that dignity is not a privilege granted by the powerful. It is a right claimed by every nation. This is what shocks those who are watching, because they see in India's defiance not recklessness, but resolve. They see not aggression, but assertion. They see not isolation, but independence. And deep down, they know that once a nation claims this kind of dignity, it cannot be taken back. Courage, once demonstrated, changes the calculus for everyone. It creates a new reality that others must adjust to. And this is where the world stands today, adjusting to a reality in which India is not a follower, not a dependent, but a decisive actor shaping the course of events. That shift will not be easy. It will challenge old alliances, old assumptions, old hierarchies. But it will also open new opportunities, opportunities for fairer trade, for more balanced partnerships, for a more inclusive order that reflects not just the few, but the many. And so, the message of India's daring move is simple: history bends toward those who have the courage to bend it. The world changes not when the cautious hold on to what is safe, but when the bold step into what is necessary. Even America, in its shock, must recognize that this is not a moment to resist, but a moment to reflect, a moment to ask whether its own leadership will be shaped by fear of losing dominance or by the wisdom of embracing equality. Because in the end, the rise of India is not a threat to America. It is a test of whether America can adapt to a world where power is shared, where dignity is mutual, where leadership is not imposed but earned. India just did what no other country dared. And the shockwaves will be felt for years to come. But let us be honest, this is not the last daring move. It is simply the beginning of a new chapter, one in which nations large and small realize that their voices matter, their choices count, and their courage can rewrite the world order. Courage, nations that dare to act teach others to believe. That is how history unfolds, not in isolation, not in silence, but in the courage of one sparking the conviction of many. Nations are not just maps and borders. They are living collections of people, of voices, of shared memory and aspiration. And when one nation stands tall, when it decides that it will not bend to pressure, when it moves against the grain of the powerful, it does more than alter its own trajectory. It sends a signal to others, a signal that says, you too can rise, you too can resist, you too can shape the world around you. Think about the long arc of history. Every great transformation we know began with a single nation daring to act. A colony declaring independence despite overwhelming odds. A people saying no to the machinery of empire. A society demanding that dignity is not a gift bestowed by rulers, but a right carried by every citizen. When those first acts of courage unfolded, they seemed reckless to some, naive to others, impossible to most. But they lit a flame, and once lit, that flame spread across borders, across cultures, across generations. Courage multiplied, belief deepened, and the world was never the same again. Consider India's independence movement. When it began, the colonial power it opposed was vast, entrenched, armed with centuries of experience in domination. To the outside world, the idea that millions of ordinary Indians could bring down an empire seemed implausible. And yet, by daring to act, through marches, through boycotts, through unyielding non-cooperation, India inspired not only its own people, but movements around the globe. African nations struggling for freedom watched. Civil rights leaders in America learned. Resistance movements in Asia found new strength. India's courage to act taught others to believe that empire was not eternal, that oppression was not permanent, that freedom was possible. That same story repeats across continents. When America itself, in its infancy, defied the British crown, it wasn't just fighting for its own independence. Its revolution became a beacon. Latin America looked on and found resolve. France rose against monarchy and feudal order. The courage of one nation to act awakened belief in others who had long been silenced. And though every struggle had its own character, its own battles, its own sacrifices, they shared a common inheritance. Courage passed down through the daring of others. But courage is not confined to wars or revolutions. It is just as vital in the choices nations make in diplomacy, in trade, in technology, in culture. Look at the moments when countries said no to being defined by someone else's terms. Look at those who dared to build their own systems, their own futures, rather than accept the easy comfort of dependence. Those choices, too, ripple outward. They inspire other nations to believe they can chart their own course without apology. That is what India's boldness means today, when it resists unfair trade conditions, when it insists on equal partnership rather than blind compliance, when it invests in its own innovation rather than waiting for others to hand down technology. It does not only benefit itself, it teaches others that sovereignty in the modern age is not only possible but necessary. When India sends satellites into space, when it creates its own digital revolution, when it stands firm in diplomacy with the world's most powerful capitals, nations far smaller, nations often overlooked, begin to whisper to themselves, if they can, perhaps we can. If they will not be silenced, why should we? Courage is contagious because it breaks illusions. For so long, power has been dressed up as inevitability. The strong tell the weak, this is the way it must be. The rich tell the poor, this is your place. The mighty tell the small, this is the natural order. But when a nation stands and says, no, it does not have to be this way, suddenly the inevitability is gone. Suddenly, the myth of permanence collapses, and what replaces it is possibility. That is what belief is, the recognition that what seemed impossible is, in fact, within reach. Think about South Africa in the darkest days of apartheid. The system seemed unshakable. The machinery of segregation and oppression seemed too strong, too embedded, too ruthless. And yet, when resistance grew, when the imprisoned refused to surrender their spirit, when the exiled raised their voices louder, when courage was displayed in the face of brutality, the world noticed. Other oppressed people in other lands believed that their own walls could fall too. The courage of South Africa did not stay in South Africa. It crossed oceans, inspired movements, changed minds across continents. And this is the lesson nations today must hold close. Courage is never solitary. The act of defiance in one corner of the globe becomes the spark for belief in another. When India stands up, others in Asia and Africa, in Latin America, in small island nations struggling to be heard, begin to believe that they too have the right to resist being taken for granted. When one voice challenges unfairness, it gives strength to the voices that have been trembling, hesitant, silenced. Courage matters most in the face of overwhelming power. It is easy to be bold when nothing is at stake, when the odds are comfortable, when the risks are small. But when standing up means risking trade sanctions, or military pressure, or diplomatic isolation, that is when courage reveals its true form. And that is why it resonates so deeply. Because people and nations recognize authenticity. They recognize when a stand is not symbolic but costly. And it is in that cost, in that willingness to endure hardship for dignity, that belief is born. Now, we should not confuse courage with recklessness. Nations that act courageously are not seeking chaos. They are not looking to destabilize the world for the sake of drama. Courage in leadership is measured, intentional, rooted in principle. It weighs the risks, but it refuses to be paralyzed by them. It calculates the costs, but it recognizes that some costs are worth bearing if the alternative is subjugation. That is the courage that teaches others to believe.